You should be able to see my screen now. Okay. All right. So that's nice and big. So what I wanted to show is the default implementation for the scheduler. So this is the scheduling module. It contains CRON activity, delay activity, started activity, and a timer activity. And we can go over those in more detail in a second. The main point now is that there's one contract called Workflow Scheduler, and it allows you to schedule a workflow at either at a recurring interval or just at a future date, or using a CRON expression. And this works for starting new workflows, but also for resuming existing workflows. And that in this API is what these activities take advantage of. So there's 3 implementations right now. So there's the default workflow scheduler, there's a Hangfire implementation, and there's a Quartz implementation, which is the most accurate one, I think, when it comes to scheduling recurring tasks. Hangfire works too, but you need to make sure to configure its sliding interval or polling interval or something like that to be every second, for example, depending on how. Hangfire is great on the other end for long-running tasks. That's what it's where it really shines. So there's also an implementation for that, and this has to do with running activities in the background. So it's a little bit unrelated to timing. I will show you how this works as well. Back to the list. Yeah, in any case, so that's there's a lot of refactoring done for the scheduling. I just mentioned background activity execution has been refactored, and I will do a demo on this one. I mentioned a new activity called CRON, and I've been working on activity cancellation. So of course, let's imagine you have a workflow that has a fork, and it branches into a timer activity or delay activity and maybe a event activity, and then you have a join. So let me actually show you in the designer. That's easier. All right. So for example, here, let me zoom out just a little bit like this. So here we have a fork, and we have 2 branches. This one will wait for 5 seconds. This will wait for 10 seconds. And then here's a join, and this join is configured to wait for all. That's sorry, wait any. That's the correct setting. And wait any means that the workflow will continue as soon as one of the inbound branches complete. So obviously, in this case, this branch will complete before this branch because this one will wait for 10 seconds. So it will continue this path. And the flow join, what it will do, it will clear all of the bookmarks of the other inbound path. So this will have created a bookmark, which will be deleted. And as a result of deleting this delay bookmark, the pending trigger used by Quartz or Hangfire or the default one will also be deleted. This doesn't yet work entirely well for Hangfire. I noticed that it will still try to resume the workflow so the job doesn't actually get canceled. Doesn't hurt the workflow execution because there will no longer be a bookmark, so the workflow will not be able to respond to that, so that's okay. But just to make it extra clean, it should actually cancel the job, especially if you have jobs that perform heavy work. Maybe you just don't want that to actually start executing, right? If let's say this is not a 10-second delay, but maybe this is some heavy indexing that you're gonna start in the background, but you want to cancel it because this branch completed first, it should not start that work. And right now it will start to work, at least in Hangfire, so I need to fix that. But that's the point of canceling activities. So in response to clearing the bookmarks, activities that created this bookmark get an opportunity to undo whatever the work they scheduled. All right, and just finally, an activity descriptor modifier API was implemented. And what does that mean? So in Elsa 2, we have a Quartz provider for the timer activities and a Hangfire provider for the timer activities as well. But depending on the provider use, you need to provide a different syntax for the CRON expression. So So Quartz uses a different interpretation of the CRON expression compared to Hangfire, and to make this visible to the user, we need a way to update the description. So for example here, sorry, this isn't, of course, this is the delay. This doesn't involve CRON, but let's add a CRON activity. Let's use this one. So here we have a CRON activity used as a trigger, and it has a CRON expression. And so right now, this description says the CRON expression at which the timer should execute. But if we change to using Quartz, so let's change it to Quartz for a second. So I'm going to switch to the Quartz integration sample project. So here I'm using it in this, of course, it's a different project, so it has a different database and it has different workflow definitions, but it doesn't matter. This is the same CRON activity. Here it's just used as a blocking activity. But here you can see that the description was updated. So it specifically mentions the Quartz.net CRON expression. And of course, we could also include maybe a link to a CRON builder UI that we did in Elsa too. So here we can do the same. But the point is the ability to change this for a given module, in this case, the Quartz module. And that happens through activity descriptor modifiers. So as an example, let's open the Quartz module. And then here we have a class called CRON activity descriptor modifiers. That's a class that implements this interface. So your module, your application can also implement this interface, and it gives you access to the activity descriptor, and which is like a blueprint for activities in the system. And they are most of these activities, they are described from classes that implement our activity, and they are using reflection. They are being reflected upon into activity descriptors, and so that's just one source. It doesn't matter from where your activity descriptors come from. It's this type that's used also by the designer to display. So here we are updating the description for the activity descriptor, and we can even, of course, change the descriptions for each input. So here there's a bit of logic that finds the input field of name with the name CRON expression. So that's this field here, and then we're setting the description to something specific for Quartz.
In Elsa 2, we have a library that will also translate the expression to a human readable description.
Yeah, that's right. So, wasn't that what you worked on?
Yeah, I worked on that one. So I'm just wondering if it is possible to port it to Elsa 3.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should. That's really nice. We probably do need to do some work on the designer end so that you can use the use the same JavaScript where as soon as somebody changes the CRON expression, that input, you want to update the description right? Yeah, so we need something like that.
I just created a new editor
in
Elsa 2. So the idea was that I just looked at how you create the editors, the drop down, the checkbox, these kinds of editors. I just created a CRON editor, and then I just plugged the library there. So whenever the change happens, it will render the text description.
Yeah, and it makes sense because a separate input editor for CRON also gives us the option to make the UI better, to do something like what we have here, CRON editor, something like this. Of course, this might be a little bit too advanced, maybe, but probably we can use some standard JavaScript.
I tried to build something like this, but it was too complicated. So I just resorted to use that library to give the description.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. The next best thing is just a human readable thing. Yeah, but we can evolve that over time.
Sure. And I wasn't aware also that Quartz and Hangfire use different expressions, because that library doesn't distinguish. It just tries to explain whatever expression you have. It doesn't highlight any limitations or any differences between the implementations.
Okay. So, yeah, and it gets complicated a little bit further because you can also configure the Hangfire CRON expression parser, which uses Chronos. It's a library that can be configured to include seconds or not. So that's another complication potentially.
Because sometimes you get runtime errors in Elsa 2 if you provide an unsupported expression.
Yeah, exactly. I think in Elsa 3 right now as well. So this is a supported expression for Quartz, but maybe not use it when using CRONAS, depending on how it's configured.
Mm-hmm.
So something to be aware of, and maybe to make a little bit more configurable also from the application developer's point of view, where maybe they have strong preferences for whether they want to support seconds or not, and maybe to support years or not. But for now, it's just an initial implementation. All right, so let's see if there's something cool that I can show. Let me switch back to just this one. And by this one, this is just a reference workflow server application. It doesn't use Hangfire or Quartz.net, which also shows that you can still use timers and background jobs. So there are default implementations, but they are not suitable for multi-node clusters because it's all in memory and all local. So you do want to use Quartz and or Hangfire when you start hosting in a cluster, just as a side note. All right, so just to show the Timeracer, so I'm going to invoke this workflow manually, and then it's going to start. It's going to wait 5 seconds, write this text, 5 seconds pass, and then join into a single branch here. And let's add one. It says end. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. So notice the nice notifications. So that's been fixed. So it was partially implemented at some point, and also notice that if you can see briefly that it animates a little bit, but the publishing happens so fast, so it's really we're really quickly updated, so you don't really see it. But this is a good improvement. All right, so let's do this, and I'm gonna run it in Postman. And let's keep an eye out on the application console. Of course, wait 5 seconds, and then it ended. And then after 5 seconds, we either see that it did another attempt to run the workflow, or probably my default implementation does the right thing and it cancels the 10-second timer. So we don't even see it. When we would use Hangfire, we do see an attempt by Hangfire to actually run the workflow, but I'll fix that. Yeah, so this one works. And of course, the CRON activity is new in Elsa 3, so let's take a look at that one as well. Yeah, we'll do that first, and then we'll take a look at this one. Let's create a new workflow. And we'll use it as a trigger. Okay, I'll just try one. I'm really bad at CRON expressions. So let's try 5 seconds. See what it says. And of course, let's do something useful like writing the timestamp. So CRON event at new date. And let's not forget this to be turned into a trigger like this. Now, as soon as I publish the background, okay, so there's an issue with parsing. Unexpected character. I have a better idea. I'll import a workflow that I know actually works. There you go. Let's do this one instead. And we'll delete this one and publish this one. And this will write Hangfire CRON event. Well, it's not Hangfire. We are not using Hangfire, but that doesn't matter. So at least it works. So every 5 seconds, we'll see this workflow execute, which is cool. So this is a very easy way to schedule tasks. And in these tasks, they don't have to be short-lived, like here, just writing a console statement. That's not very helpful. Maybe you want to kick off some work, which could be done using Hangfire, or maybe invoke API calls, like here we have an HTTP request, and that's actually the focus of this one, the background activity canceller, which I want to show. So imagine you have a task or a job, a recurring job. So here we start with a write line, but you can of course start it with a CRON, like here. We'll connect it to this one here, so this will start. So now every 5 seconds, this workflow is going to fire, and then it's going to do two things. It's going to wait for 5 seconds here. Let's update the display text. Wait 5 seconds. Then it's going to continue into this join. And this one is going to fire a very slow request. And it's going to make a call to a local API endpoint called slow. And internally, it's going to do a task that delay for 10 seconds. So that means that this will never finish, right? Because 5 seconds will execute first. It will go into the flow join, and this will clear the bookmark created by the background activity scheduler. So the nice thing about this HTTP request is it's internally, it doesn't know that it's executing it from a background thread or a background job, but that's handled by the Elsa workflow middleware pipeline. So there's a middleware component that will see that this is checked. So it's configured to execute asynchronously. So what it will do, instead of scheduling the activity for execution in the foreground, if you will, it's going to create a bookmark and then create queue a job on some queue in the background. And then in the background, it will pick up that job. It will execute this activity in isolation. And then after that's done, it will then resume the suspended workflow. And that's very neat because you can enable this task ability to any custom activity without having to do any coding for that. And just to remind you how that works, if we go to the HTTP request activity here. So this is the class of the activity, and it's annotated with an activity attribute, which allows you to provide all sorts of metadata like description and namespace, etc., but also a kind. And the kind is what controls the behavior. So if it's set to task, by default, it will execute like it would be just an action, which means it will just execute synchronously or in the foreground. But if you set it to task, it will still do that unless the user checks this checkbox. So setting it to task will make this UI visible to the user. If you set it to job, you will not see this UI, but it will always execute in the background. So that's something you might find useful as well. Trigger, I don't think is currently implemented, and action is the default. So anyway, so that's a brief note on task. Yeah, let's just run this just to see how it works. So I'm going to publish this one. Now every 5 seconds, this will be fired. And so here we see start. And then after 5 seconds, we see a task canceled exception, which makes sense because this comes from the slow endpoint, which is being canceled. So the send HTTP request activity invokes the request, but it also includes the cancellation token, and that cancellation token is being canceled. So that will cause this error on your endpoint. And then we see timeout completed. And so that is this write line, timeout completed, and that's this one. And because it went through this flow join, it canceled this request. So yeah, that's a quick update on the Elsa progress so far.
So you mentioned that it will use the cancellation token. So it means that even if the job is still running, it will attempt to stop it rather than waiting it to finish and then search for the bookmark.
Yeah, and this
Is it like that?
Yeah, that's correct. And but it also depends on your scheduler implementation. So for example, let's take a look at the default one. So the default one lives in the runtime module, and then we have the default background. No, not this one. The local background activity scheduler. So this implements a thing called iBackground Activity Scheduler. This is what is used for running activities in the background. And the default implementation uses channels. So it's abstracted in an iJob queue, but internally it just creates a channel. Here we have a job channel. So I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong class. It's this one. This job channel creates an unbounded channel to which these DTOs, this DTO enqueue job, which contains some information about the job body, the action to perform, a cancellation token source, callback when the job completed. So it's like a poor man's Hangfire implementation just in memory. So when this implementation is requested to cancel the job, it will trigger the cancellation token that is passed into the job. But Hangfire, once the background job is executing, you cannot cancel it. You will have to do it yourself. Is my understanding, by invoking or making sure that you provide a cancellation token that you control through the cancellation token source, so that you can request a cancellation, which is not implemented here. So if once it started running, it will run until it's finished. There's no canceling, and I don't think it's necessary. The point here for canceling activities is let's say they are scheduled for execution and you want to cancel that scheduling. So there's two things that you could cancel, right? So that's the plan to execute it. So you want to cancel that. That's like a timer schedule. And if the job is running, maybe you want to cancel it, maybe not. I don't know. It probably depends on the use case. And maybe we should think of ways to have precise control over what your intention is. But right now it just depends on your provider.
I think generally it's okay unless the activity has some side effects, like it's updating some variables or writing some files, updating database. Then only it becomes a concern what the cancellation means. So it depends on the activity. If it's just sending a request, waiting for response, and this request doesn't have any side effect, it's just fine. We can wait.
It's a good point, though. I think you're right. So what does it mean for an activity to be canceled? It might completely depend on what it's doing internally. So maybe what we should do is when a cancellation is requested, the activity class should have a chance to respond to that cancellation. So there will be some default stuff happening like clearing bookmarks. And in this case, this is executed in the background. So the send HTTP activity, the send HTTP request activity could be implemented to also handle this cancellation event, if you will. In this case, it wouldn't do anything special, but if you have a custom activity, then you can do some cleanup if you want. And also maybe depending on the source, what the reason the job was canceled. Maybe if the reason is because of a join construct, maybe you want the cancellation to do something else. I don't know. We need to think about those scenarios. But in general, I think you're right. It would be good. It would be up to the activity to determine what cleanup to do, if any. Yeah. So let's take a look at the task list. If I manage to find my tabs. So there's always a battle with this floating tool window from Teams when I share screens. All right, now it looks good. So let's see. We have a bunch of items that CRON is working on. Let's go over them quickly. Broken pagination and definition in instance browsers. So if we look at an example here, let's say we have many records. This UI is a little bit broken on a small screen, it seems. Let me go back to workflow definitions. So here we have a pager. Right now we just have 3 workflow definitions, but let's say we have 10 and the page size is 5, then the pagination just doesn't work. I mean, the current page selection does change, but the list of items being displayed stays the same. So that needs to be fixed. We want an API endpoint to return the package version so that we can show it in the UI, like what we have in Elsa 2, which currently is broken, as you mentioned, in Elsa 2, but we need to fix that. Or broken, or it's out of date. We need to see what's going on there. But we want the same approach for Elsa 3. Filters in the workflow definition browser and instance browser should be persistent, because right now if you make a selection, for example, on your page size, close the window and then go back, it's reset. So it might be more convenient for this to be maintained. Same for maybe goes for the this sort of sorting settings and filters. All right, so this is going to be very important when you work with composite activities created in the designer. And I don't know if you know or if you remember, but when you create a new workflow that you want to use as a composite activity, so for example, we have a sum activity that can add 2 numbers together, which is useful as an activity like this. So now when we create a new workflow, we can use it, right, like this. But at this moment, when we add it to the designer, it is set to version 1, which is the only version at this moment. And I've got to publish it, but let's say I publish it to version 1, and now let's say we've identified a missing feature, or maybe there's an issue, or we just want to make a change, then we make that change. Let's say we add some activity like this, and then I do publish. So now we are at version 2. But when we go back to the workflow here that uses it, this is the consuming workflow. It's still pointing at version 1, but we have version 2, so we can manually upgrade if we want to. Same goes for this one. And this is done on purpose because it's technically possible to have these activities always use the latest published version, but that could also be dangerous because maybe you make a change that certain workflow, consuming workflows aren't ready to handle, for example. So for that reason, the default is to have to explicitly update to the latest version. But if you have many usages of your sub workflow or composite activities like this, it can be a lot of work to then have to go through all of your workflows that use the sum activity in this example, and then have to select them one by one and then upgrade them to the latest version. So to fix that, we want to do it like this. So we want to do it in 2 iterations. So the first iteration would be a very simple approach where we just add a checkbox to the settings tab. We'll call it auto update consuming workflows. So that would look something like, so if we go back to the sum activity here and we go to settings. So the idea is that we just add a checkbox here that you can check. And if it's checked, anytime you hit publish, all of the consuming workflows will be updated automatically. So this is the quote dangerous behavior that we could have implemented by default, but we don't want to. But if you think you know what you're doing, you should be able to make it easy for yourself and just update the consuming workflows, potentially breaking them, but that's a conscious decision you can make. Of course, it's not ideal. We should provide an even better approach where you can make a selection of workflows you want to update, because maybe for some, it's safe, and maybe for others, you want to do it manually. So that's the second iteration where it could be either on the same settings tab, or maybe we'll create a new tab that displays all of the consuming workflows. Could be a list of checkboxes, and then you can tick them one by one, or maybe select all of them and then unselect a few of them. And then a button that allows you to update those workflows to point to the latest published version of your sub workflow or the composite activity.
And will that bump the version number for the consuming workflow?
Oh, good question. That could be a separate option. By default, I think they should stay in draft, or unless maybe we add another checkbox, or maybe do a dialog confirmation or a question that asks the user, do you also want to publish the consuming workflows or not? It's a good question, because if we don't publish them automatically, then you have a lot of drafts, and then you still have to go and publish them one by one, potentially, unless we update also the workflow definition browser, where you can maybe select all of the draft ones. So let's say this one here, we have a draft latest version is 1, but it's not published. And then we could have bulk action where we say publish. Oh, we already have a bulk action called publish, so you could still do it. So then, but then it would be 2 steps. So, but yeah, it might be a good idea to have this option enabled as well on the composite activity here. So we would have a checkbox automatically update, and then also a checkbox automatically publish those updated consuming workflows.
Because if you want to review the history later on, it should not be the case that the same version of the workflow has 2 definitions. It will be confusing. So definitely the version has to be incremented. But the question is whether to publish immediately or take a decision that is something maybe the user has to decide.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right. Somewhat related, handling deletion of versions of composite activities. So imagine you have the sum composite activity. So it's like your reusable activity here, and it has its own version. And let's say you have many versions and you want to do some cleanup. But now let's say I'm gonna delete version 3, but if it's referenced by a consuming workflow, that will break that workflow. So we should either just prevent it. Maybe when you try to delete, it should display a message that there's this number of consuming workflows. So first remove the activity from there, or maybe it will allow you to remove it from the activities, or just go ahead, because then it will create a draft and it will not be published, and then you can fix it up manually. Whatever we decide to do there, at the very least, we should make the user aware that they are consuming workflows, because this would be a breaking operation if there's one workflow using this version of the composite activity. So that's this little task.
I think another option is to shift the consuming activity to the next version, or I don't know, or the original
Sure.
version.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that could be an option to say, well, update to the latest version, or maybe a specified
Yeah.
version. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, good point. Yeah, so we also want to be able to see the workflow variables and their values in the workflow instance viewer. Right now, it's just an empty list. So unfortunately, I can't show the browser because my window is too small. Ah, there you go. So let's say I open this one. So we're now looking at the workflow instance. So we have the journal here. Oh, and then here we have variables, but it's completely empty. Although, well, this workflow definition doesn't even have variables, but if it had variables, we wouldn't see it here. So we need to fix that. We want to see the name, the type, where it's stored. Is it stored in the workflow instance itself, or maybe on blob storage, and the value.
And maybe we can think about a better representation of the values compared to Elsa 2, where it's just a big JSON dump. Maybe it can be more formatted. If it's an array, it will show it in a list format, or
Yeah.
like in Visual Studio Inspector. When you are looking at an array, it will show it in a list format. If you're looking at a date, it will show it formatted as a date. Something like that, maybe we can think about as well.
Yeah, that would be very good. And do you are you saying maybe there should be like a button that you can click so that it shows up in a pop-up?
Yeah.
And then we can have nice formatters depending on the type of data. We can show it in a friendly way, but also just in its raw format for technical users. Maybe if it's JSON, they want to copy the JSON, or if it's an array, they want to copy the values, right?
Yeah, something like what we have in Visual Studio, for example, when you are debugging watching variables, it gives you two views. One is just the raw value, and then there is a button where you click, and then you get a more detailed viewer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that'd be good. Let's see if I can conjure it up. So here I can say view. So this is like a pop-up. So this is in Writer, of course. We'll use a nice model, but the point is clear. You should be able to see the details.
Yep.
Nice. All right, so that's this one. Being able to navigate between workflow definitions using composite activities. So what I want for the dashboard application. So this is not the dashboard. This is just the designer. So I'm not going to update it for this component, because we want to redo it in Blazor, and the designer plus the dashboard, we want to redo it, where we will also have a tabbed view. So like in Writer or in Visual Studio, we have tabs. Can I remove this? It's a little bit hard to okay, so it's gone. So notice these tabs here, right? So you can quickly navigate between documents. Similarly, we want to be able to quickly navigate between workflow documents that you have open in tabs, like browser tabs, but then within the dashboard. So that's one thing we want to do. But this task is not about that. This task is about, let's say we have, let me see if I can figure out what's going on here. Oh, it's paused. All right, so let's say we have workflow 1. And now let's say I want to change the implementation of this sum activity. Now what I have to do right now is I go to the workflow definitions modal, click sum, can make a change now, like I don't know, maybe add some activity, make a publish, and then I need to go back to the consuming workflow, right? So it's a little bit of a hassle. What would be nice if we can just go directly to this thing, maybe by double clicking, and then double clicking will open the workflow definition editor. Then the question is, how do you get back to this workflow? The idea here is that we will just add breadcrumbs. So for example, what we have here with this activity, which has a embedded port, if we click into this one, notice that we have a breadcrumbs. So similarly, we would also show breadcrumbs so we can quickly go up one level. So that's this task.
So these tasks are planned for the release candidate, or?
Nope. These tasks are we're going to do it as much as we can, but these will not be required for the release candidate. These are just nice to have as part of the RC, but it's not going to be blocking. And then speaking of the release candidate, we are planning on end of May, beginning of June, but we try to do it before the end of May. So just because right now it's in a very stable state. There are still some improvements, some new features being added, some missing functionality that we realize that we still need to add, like the ability to modify activity descriptors, canceling activities. That is pretty important. So it might happen that we come across into those kind of missing features, but other than that, it seems very more and more complete, so and useful. So we don't want to wait too long for the RC release. Yeah, so unpublish button doesn't work currently. That's of course very simple to do, but low hanging fruit, but it needs to be done. Right now it does nothing, so we need to fix that. And this one, by the way, is important for release candidates. I don't want to release a UI where there are buttons that don't do anything. So the more complicated ones aren't really necessary, or not for the RC, not necessary at all, but this one is necessary. And actually I should reorder these in a way so that the most important ones are at the top. All right, and then, yeah, so this is an annoying one. Activity tooltips are cut off. So if we look here, you see the tooltip, it's cut off. And I don't know how to fix it.
Maybe z-index.
Yeah, that was my first thought as well. Didn't work. And it has to do with the way, yeah, it has to do with the, what was it? With the, there's this CSS attribute to control the overflow, whether it's hidden or not. And you can set it for vertical and horizontal. But right now the this fills up the entire vertical space, which is what you want.
Okay.
But when you set it up like that, or the way I set it up, we'll then clip these tooltips. If I don't auto fill this vertically, then the overlay is okay. Then the tooltip will flow over. But then of course, if you have just a few items here, then here this panel will just stop here. Something along those lines. It's I didn't want to bother. I figured let's ask a front-end developer to see if they can restructure the HTML. Probably that's what's necessary.
Sometimes it can be fixed by moving the tooltip component itself outside of the component. Just make it part of the body. Then it will not be affected with the overlay. I'm not sure which plugin you are using, but it could help to move the tooltip object itself, the component, outside of the panel and keep it part of the main body.
Yeah, that will
Then
definitely fix it. Yeah, because then it's not inside of this thing structurally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I didn't want to go there yet before trying to fix it or have it fixed by a front-end developer by maintaining this, because the implementation right now is very simple. There's no plugin used. It's just Tailwind CSS, and that's it. So I prefer to keep it that way. But if that turns out to be impossible, then we should do what you suggested and move these tooltip elements out outside of this component at least. But then we need to figure out, using JavaScript, the correct position when we do a mouse over.
Yeah.
Which is
then it becomes a plugin. Yeah.
Yeah, or use a plugin. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Yeah. So what the hell? Yeah, these were here already. So we'll see how far we get with each of them. There's plenty to do.
Thanks.
Yeah. What else? Just what I remembered. That's necessary for the RC as well is more complete documentation.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
And one thing I noticed that if you search in Google for the documentation, you might reach the old documentation instead of the new documentation that you created. So I don't know, maybe it depends on the user, but yeah, GitHub pages comes first.
Oh, yeah.
So probably you can redirect or take this down or something so that, because some users still refer to this rather than the new documentation.
Yeah, good point. We should put in a redirect here to the new one because it's more up to date.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just messing with the. I'm trying to switch tabs. Am I the only one having this issue? Do you ever have this issue when sharing your screen, or do you never use Teams for screen sharing?
I use it on Windows, but normally I share the monitor, the full monitor, not the app.
Yeah, that's what I did. I'm sharing the full monitor.
Yeah, in Windows it's fine, but I don't know. Maybe it's something with Mac because of the top bar.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. But on Android also, when I'm using Teams or an iPad, it's really horrible. I get all kinds of bugs.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I sometimes I want to scream. I just don't do it because we're on, we're being recorded. But
Yeah.
oh man, yeah. But this is the new, this is more up to date. This Elsa 2 website.
Yes.
And look,
So
the version number is correct.
Yes.
All right. So my dog needs to pee, I think. So I'm gonna call it, and we are over time, anyways.
Sure.
All right, my friend. Thank you for joining, and you have a good evening.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.
Sure. Bye.
Bye-bye.